It will be almost 4 years since the abrogation of Article 370. Jammu and Kashmir is seeing relative peace. The terror attacks have reduced and the encounters have reduced as well. But that hasn't ended radicalization completely. Today, to speak about Jammu and Kashmir and a lot of pressing issues is a significant personality who has dealt with Jammu and Kashmir, and not just Jammu and Kashmir, but terrorism overall, countering terrorism and radicalization as well. We are joined by SM Sahai, former Additional Secretary, National Security Council Secretariat. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to begin by asking you about your perception of Jammu and Kashmir, or your analysis of Jammu and Kashmir. You've had several critical roles in the Kashmir Valley and in New Delhi, also monitoring that very closely. Do you think that the jihad or the terror that has unleashed all across Jammu and Kashmir in the last 3 decades is dying?
Well, I mean, if I say it is dying, I don't want to be, being too presumptuous. Now, if we examine what has happened in Jammu and Kashmir over a period of time, Kashmir has had a fairly, has had phases of turbulence, and the most recent one being its most violent and the longest phase, has finally is seeing diminishing attrition. But whether we will be able to sustain it or not is the big question, because administrative measures are useful in bringing sanity to a situation for a period of time, but sustaining it in the long term is going to require a lot more than just simply taking administrative measures and a reduction of violence. So, I think that is where we look at it. But if you move away from the whole issue of violence, then I think what is important to be seen is that what is being done in Kashmiri society through push and pull factors to ensure that radicalization is reduced. See, when is radicalization a problem? See, radicalization in itself is not a completely evil thing. There has going to be turbulence, societies will change. But when that change comes to the point when it becomes violent, that is when the problem starts. Now, the whole idea is that you don't let it reach that level. And that is where your engagement and your explanation to the population, I think that conversation is lacking globally. You know, it's like you have people throwing narratives at the population, but where is the engagement? I mean, all your social media platforms will put out content, videos, photographs, messages, etc. There is no dialogue. The only dialogue that ever takes place is through some of these platforms, chat platforms. Those are closed groups. It's not in general. So, I think that is something that you need to engage. Facebook, of course, does provide to some extent that kind of platform, but you know, how available is it? And you know, on a post 5 minutes later, it's out of date. It's not there. So, if you either seen it or you haven't seen it. So, I think the whole usage of technology and how technology is impacted and how that has been understood by the people who are wanting to spread radicalization by constantly bombarding you with various versions of the same content. I think that is something that really needs to be worked on. But that's only one part of it. I think the offline part of any conflict situation is equally important than online. We all get very obsessed with the online part, but the offline part is equally important. And in Kashmir situation, I think now that the attrition has come down, you have to give a sense of purpose to those people, not a sense of defeat. It cannot be a narrative that we finished off militancy and therefore there is a defeat over it. The person who picked up the gun against you and was indulging in terrorism was actually trying to communicate. They had a grievance, whether real or imagined, but they were trying to communicate with you to tell you that they had a grievance. Now, somewhere that grievance has to be addressed, because if we go back to the issue of Khalistan, for example, post 93, we didn't ever expect that this will come up again. We thought we had shut the matter completely, but it is coming back in a different kind of way. So, obviously, that residual grievance in Khalistan should have been addressed at that time itself. So, similarly in Kashmir, it's not that the residual grievance will not be there, and that needs to be addressed. their environment is right.
If I ask you, Mr. Sahai, that when you were the IG of Kashmir, if you compare the situation of Kashmir from that time when you were on the ground, you were the security chief of the valley, and there was violence, there were terror attacks, and there were killings, but yet you did whatever was possible to bring peace. If you compare that era, that time, with the current situation, how would you analyze that for the layman?
See, one thing that we achieved in that period was that not only was there a dramatic drop in violence, statistically, if you look at it from 2005 to 6 to 8 to almost 2016, there has been a dramatic drop in the violence. I'm not saying there's a dramatic drop in the fear factor, but definitely a dramatic drop in the violence. Alongside that, the local recruitment was perhaps the lowest at that time, because that time we were able to very effectively engage with the youth. We went to universities and colleges. We even had engagements at the subdivision level with the people who had been throwing stones in the 2010 agitation. We had engaged with their parents. We had also engaged with the students who had a very positive outlook to life, the ones who were looking for a better future and did not want to be part of this. That voice had to be articulated. It needed to come out, which it was not coming out. Everybody is very obsessed with this minority of people who were wanting to only indulge in violence, but they were a small number. The very large number of people were not wanting to do that. So, I think there was a need for that narrative to come out and influence this negativity, and I think that worked quite well. So, today I think that same thing has to be brought out. There has to be an address to the aspiration of the youth in Kashmir. And when I say youth, we should not only think about the people who are seeking employment, because when you talk about that, you always, the whole question ends up in employment. Who's indulging in the violence? The violence is being indulged in with people who belong to the age groups of 15 to 20. And that age group, nobody is actually looking for a future. He is a revolutionary. He wants to change the world. He wants to change the circumstances of society. It's only after when you reach the age of 21, 22 that you start actually thinking in terms of employment and when the next meal is going to come from, because then the family pressure starts building up. So, I mean, if you look at it, where do you find recruitment of anybody who is more than 20 years old? So, there is obviously this is also something to do with an age group. So, that age group cannot be addressed by employability. They have to be given a leadership model. They have to be given a chance of articulation. You have those kind of programs which we had tried to do at that time. So, then that ventilation of their ideas, the fact that they are being heard, and it's like it's a global issue. Youth all over the world will behave like that. You and I at that particular age also behaved like that. So, that is where you have to give a direction, and it has to be a societal effort. It can't be just government. Society has to get involved. But yes, government has to involve the society as well. So, that's where the conversation has to take place.
Mr. Sahai, you have been in Kashmir and you've been in Delhi. Does New Delhi understand Kashmir? Has New Delhi understood Kashmir in the past? And how does New Delhi understand Kashmir today?
See, one thing that New Delhi did very wisely was the abrogation, or rather I would say the amendment of Article 370. Now, there's been a lot of debate of why was it allowed. You see, the thing is that in these circumstances when the constitution was being framed, India was coming out of a colonial rule. We were a very subdued nation in the sense that we were still struggling with the afterthrows of partition. We had to set up an economy that had to be brought out of the colonial exploitation. There were many things that were there, and I think the least that we would have wanted at that time would be to have a Kashmir issue being debated and coming under pressure with that. So, I think some kind of constitutional gymnastics was done at that time to be able to create a Kashmir committee, create a separate constitution, so that you were able to satisfy the Western world, which was very pro-Pakistan by the way, that some arrangement was being done with regard to the entire dispute on Kashmir. But time has passed, things have happened. The generation that wanted it, or the section of the generation that wanted it, has moved on. The younger generation have seen life in a very different world, in a very different environment. They saw it in a democratic India. So, persisting with that separate arrangement was probably not unwise, because I think at the end of the day in Kashmir there is a need for the issue of sovereignty and belonging to be settled. and sometimes you have to do it the hard way. So, when you actually removed that arrangement, one message that went out very clearly to the Kashmiris is that this is your destiny, this is final. So, a lot of the people who were not wanting to get involved in the politics of what was the political future and wanted to kind of have a life like any other global citizen would like economic prosperity, would like to do trade and commerce, where would they find it? Logically, it had to come through India. Pakistan was in no position to offer anything. So, Kashmiri is a very practical person. Let us be clear about that. One thing I would say very clearly about him. He is very emotional, but at one level he is very practical. And this has given them that opportunity. So, I think that's one good thing that's happened.
This graph of terror, we've seen it spiking, reducing, spiking, reducing. In the last few years, we have seen a significant reduction in perhaps to a certain extent in recruitment, but to a large extent in terror attacks, in killings, even though there are minority killings, civilian killings that are continuously happening. How do you see this graph shaping in the near future in Kashmir?
We are at a situation where we have been able to, as I said, bring sanity in the situation. But if we don't carry on with the dialogue which I mentioned earlier, there has got every chance that it might erupt again, because the youth population will only grow. So, every year we add about 1 to 1.5% to the youth population, and it is known that whenever you have at least 25% increase in the youth population, turbulence will take place regardless of which society it is. The good thing is that there may have been spikes, but every spike was always lower than the last one. So, there is that improvement in the situation. Yes, the big question remains the fear factor. Now, if without indulging in violence or indulging in that kind of violence, if they are still not able to bring about an improvement on the fundamental issues, one of course which remains is the rehabilitation and the resettlement of the Kashmiri Pandits. So, if that remains unaddressed, ultimately at the end of the day, what have you achieved? Fine, tourism will be there, but tourism was there even when there was a lot of militancy. In 2002, you had a lot of tourists, 5, 6, 8, barring maybe, and every year you have had tourists till the month of July. Whatever has happened in Kashmir has been post July. So, sometimes we get caught up in that kind of narrative. Now, where Delhi is concerned, yes, they are alive to this problem, but Delhi is also encumbered by geopolitical issues. So, you have two neighbors who are very interested in Jammu and Kashmir, and one of them certainly has become a global power. In fact, it has become the other pole. So, dealing with that, you have to be also very careful as to how you tailor your domestic policies, so that you do not invite that kind of trouble. So, that is to be understood from a national perspective. So, when we look at it from the worm eyes view from the Kashmiri perspective, a lot of things we are not able to understand, but when we look at it from a bird's eye point of view from the Delhi perspective, then a lot of things become clear.
Do you also feel that this reduction in terror or perhaps even infiltration is post Pulwama, Balakot and Article 370 abrogation, when there's been a constant economic turmoil and political turmoil in Pakistan, there's been FATF pressure as well, and there's been a political collision, so as to say, and political military collision as well in Pakistan, which has perhaps forced them to take a temporary break, so as to say. Is that a reason that you believe?
Yes, I think what has happened is that India has been able to at least make the Western world understand, whether it is because of the Western world's interest in India wanting to counter China, that they would need to accommodate us on the issue of Pakistan, because earlier on what the issue was that terrorism was not terrorism till it hit them. It became terrorism when it hit them, and then subsequently, for whatever reasons, they had to take Pakistan's help on the Afghanistan issue, which Pakistan used very effectively against us, because a lot of material was diverted from there. They continue to be used by the Americans against the Taliban till recently, but at that time they had the other problem of the Chinese. So, till that time they were comfortable in winking at what Pakistan is doing with us, but post that, when they realized that they had to balance it out, then they did contain Pakistan in a lot of these issues, and that is why you find that on the FATF, it was the Americans' initiative to put them on the mat. But should I say that it was only about FATF was only about Kashmir? No. FATF was a lot to do with Pakistan and Afghanistan also, because you know that Pakistanis were playing a lot of mischief in Afghanistan, and they were playing a double game. So it was like literally running with the hare and hunting with the hound. So it was that also, but alongside that, it helped us in Kashmir. Today, Pakistan is, terrorism in Kashmir is a very low cost warfare. So if we believe that the Pakistanis cannot afford it, no, they can afford it in material terms, but they cannot afford it perhaps politically. So that's why I said this is an opportunity. See, if you go back in time, you will realize that why did the Indira Sheikh Accord take place? Because after the 71 war, the Pakistanis had realized, and because of them, the Kashmiri separatists had realized that they could give nothing. And at this time also, I think the realization should be made clear to them that Pakistan can give you nothing. So whatever you have to do it within this country.
If I can shift now our focus entirely to Pakistan, you've seen the Toshkhana case that has emerged against Imran Khan. There are 36 cases that are slapped against him, mostly of corruption, some of terrorism, but one major narrative is the Toshkhana case. And it seems it's almost imminent that he'll be arrested. He perhaps will become a martyr. But the main focus of the coalition government in Pakistan has been to disqualify Imran Khan from the elections that are likely to take place in August. How do you see Imran Khan, building up as a politician in Pakistan? Do you see him as a ray of hope, or do you think that Imran Khan, like other prime ministers, will get a second chance?
Pakistan's politics has got a very peculiar and very interesting history. It's all between whoever the Pakistan army props up as a puppet, then that puppet is no more a puppet, then he is removed one way or another. So you look at all of them. They either get hanged, or they get killed, or they are exiled. Now the same story. When Ayub Khan took over, he handed it over to Yahya Khan. Yahya Khan then gave it to the Bhutto, who was their pet at that time. Then Zia ul Haq took it away from him and hanged Bhutto. And then they brought in a series of these other puppets. Then they brought in Nawaz Sharif, who was again their pet. Then Nawaz Sharif tried to spread his wings. Then they clipped him and sent him in exile. Then they brought in Baqir Benazir, who mysteriously died in a terrorist attack, and so on. So the story is virtually the same. This time around, what is interesting is that Imran Khan has been able to openly defy the army, and that challenge the army is not going to easily accept, because all said and done, Shahbaz Sharif is also a prop of the army. They are the ones who managed the defections and breakup of the alliance to prop him up, but he is not a popular leader in that sense. So one is that why could Imran Khan succeed, and that is because he has become a cult figure. So disqualification or whatever they may succeed in doing, keeping him away from the elections, but it will be a sham election. And the Pakistanis are now beginning to taste democracy. So they're not going to be pushed over that easily.
Post Taliban takeover of Kabul, there were these differences that emerged between the Pakistan army and Imran Khan. And Imran wanted General Faiz to lead the Pakistan army. It did not go that way. Bajwa and Imran were almost bad-mouthing each other, mocking each other in public. At least Imran Khan was. Why do you think that such kind of a turmoil happened between Pakistan army and Imran Khan? And what does this tell us about the state of Pakistan?
See, this is a problem that happened between Nawaz Sharif and the Pakistan army as well. See, assertion of democratic forces in Pakistan to get out of the clutches of the Pakistan army is going to be a perennial fight. But I think any sensible democratic leader in Pakistan would like to make peace with India and to get his country moving ahead. So it is an interesting time. Let us see whether Imran is able to actually push that.
But which way is Pakistan army likely to go? Because it seems to be under tremendous pressure right now. Because I say this because they saw Taliban takeover of Kabul as their strategic, strength, strategic depth for them. But that seems to have taken an entirely different road, with Taliban, trading charges at Pakistan, mocking Bilawal Bhutto, and saying that you cannot dictate terms to us. And now Pakistan Army has this huge economic turmoil that is, staring at them from Islamabad. And then there is the TTP, which has, pledged more attacks, not just on Pakistan Army, but now on politicians as well. So how is Pakistan Army going to deal with this kind of a situation vis-a-vis, Imran Khan? Will they give him a second chance, or do they continue with this kind of a coalition setup?
I don't think Imran Khan is going to get a second chance if the Pakistan Army can help it. See, I think what people did not understand about the Taliban and the Pakistani Army relationship, or the Pakistani relationship, was that the Taliban was acting with a gun held to its head, because their families and all the Taliban leadership had their families in Pakistan. Now, this has been a problem with Pakistan throughout. They always blackmail you into a situation. Somehow that that arrogance at the end of the day comes up, and they tend to lose out. So, I think with the Taliban, the same thing happened. The Taliban was actually the creation of an American oil company, and they needed Pakistan as their for help. But they were very happy with the Pakistanis? No way. Secondly, I think one thing that the Taliban itself also realized, that the people of Afghanistan hate the Pakistanis, because they are aware that a lot of people who got butchered in Afghanistan were actually done by ISI agents, and out of compulsion they may have used Pakistan support. But at the end of the day, I think every government has to realize that the will of the people will prevail, and I think they also understood that. Secondly is that the first Taliban regime and the consequences of that they lost their country for 22 years, was not lost on them. They didn't want to go back to that, because if they indulged in one or two acts of terrorism or anti-West, and they were going to be bombarded again, because this time the ability of the Americans to be able to use technology and do a remote action is much improved. So, they actually don't need to be coming physically into Afghanistan to be able to achieve that purpose.
If I can ask you, why does Imran Khan have this kind of a massive support base right now, where you mentioned that he is defying the Pakistan Army for the first time, outside his Zaman Park residence? There were thousands of people who came out, and it was an embarrassment for the Islamabad and the Lahore police that they had to retreat, and the orders of the Pakistan Army could not be really taken forward. He could not have been arrested at that stage, where there was such a mammoth chunk of people who were supporting Imran Khan. So, where does this kind of a massive support come in? Yes, he was a star cricketer, but how has he been able to make himself a star politician as well in Pakistan?
In South Asian politics, the underdog always gets a lot of support. Plus, I think Imran Khan's ability and his charisma to be able to articulate, because all said and done, I mean, being a star cricketer does have an advantage. But I think what is more important is that he was able to articulate a lot of aspirations of the Pakistani people. And that is where I think they began to identify with him. Plus, I think there are also, it's always a situation is that you get tired of one rule, because the situation is not improving. So, when a situation is not improving, a frustrated population will look for a new leadership at short intervals. So, whereas Imran Khan may be seeing a great rise in his popularity, if he is not able to deliver, then that popularity will fade away equally fast. So this is a characteristic of people who are in turmoil. They are frustrated. They are looking for solutions. Apart from the other things, the natural disasters haven't helped them too much. So I think it's a lot to do with. It's not so much to do with his popularity as to the frustration of the Pakistani people trying to find some hope somewhere.
If I can head back home, radicalization has been something that has been, seeping in for years together in different forms and manifestations. We've seen radicalization in Kashmir. In the last decade or so, we've seen radicalization in the south in the form of ISIS, Al Qaeda, and different groups. Even educated youth, particularly in the south, joining these ranks. Well, if you were in the government, I would have asked you that what is the government going to do about it? What is the government doing about it? But let me rephrase that and ask you, how do we deal with this kind of a threat, this kind of a radicalization?
See, radicalization is a function of education. In the Indian context, Islam, I mean, if you're looking at only from the Islamic point of view, though I feel that parallel radicalization is taking place amongst the Hindus as well. But you leave that out and we just talk about the Muslims. How did Islam come to India? Now, there were two routes. One, Islam came through the Arabian Sea, through the trade route. And in the south, it came basically as a trading tool. The Zamorin of Calicut encouraged his people to adopt Islamic ways because it was easy to trade with the Arab world. And as you are aware that these kind of practices slowly start creating an identity, and then that crystallizes into a sharper identity, and you got a completely different community in existence, which is what's happened in the south. Now, that relationship never changed. They continue to trade, and our people continue to get influenced by them. So, when radicalization took place there, it also took place here. Now, the Indian diaspora from the south that had gone to work in the Arab world was not treated very well, and there was already a anger and against the ruling regimes who were being seen as illegitimate, and they were illegitimate. But they were basically being seen as props of the Western world only to exploit the oil wealth. There again, why? Because education had improved, people became more aware. So, this Indian Muslim worker who went there imbibed that and brought it back. He had also got money. So, from there, that is why the real danger of Islamic radicalization comes from the south, not from the north. So, their conversion was not a conversion that took place because of social discrimination. In the north, the conversion took place because of the social discrimination. And the reason why radicalization in the north is not taking off, because at one level, the Muslim in the north is aware that he is a convert from the Dalit. Why did recruitment in the ISIS from India did not take place? Because when they went there, they were treated so badly. They did not want to go there. So, he may have an issue here, but he understands that he has to remain here. And except for the Muslim elite in 47, the average Muslim did not leave. Because where would he have gone? And today he will not leave more so than ever, because he knows how the the immigrants from India are being treated in Pakistan. So, that is one very big factor which is actually keeping radicalization in check. There will be anger, there will be people who exploit that anger, but how many incidents do we have?
Finally, I want to ask you about disinformation. Misinformation and disinformation are emerging threats, increasing day by day in the age of social media. How is the government or institutions really going to deal with it at this stage, where narratives are playing a very significant role, and we see wars actually being fought on the digital medium, on social media, the biggest of which we saw recently, Russia and Ukraine. It has been perception warfare altogether continuously. In the context of India and China as well, the kind of propaganda warfare that China does against India or against the West has been very much prevalent, and the others haven't been able to counter it entirely. How does one deal with that?
But let me ask you honestly, if the Chinese propaganda is that effective, why is there such a national consensus on anti-Chinese? You see, the echo chamber of people in the technology sphere has to be reduced from the ground realities. At the end of the day, there is no love lost for China in the Indian population. So, where is the propaganda succeeding? So, if you look at what their media platforms are putting out, is anybody receiving it? So, just because a few journalists have been bought over, or just because somebody is going on a junket, or one odd author here or there is writing that they've got great achievement, they have got great achievement, there is no denying that. But that the Indian population has suddenly begun to love China and will condone their actions, no. So, I mean, there they haven't succeeded. Yeah, okay, I can accept one thing is that they may have succeeded in exploiting the fault lines within India to create social dissonance in India to some extent, yes. But frankly, if you look at it in the northeast, in left wing where the left ideology would have worked best, you don't see anything happening there. I feel that the Chinese would not like to dirty their hands on this because they've already got Pakistan doing it. So, I think in that sense, because they've already got some their errand boy to do it, they wouldn't bother. And it's easier for them to do it through Pakistan because Pakistan is linguistically connected, racially connected in South Asia. So, it's easy for them to get it done.
But overall, how does one tackle disinformation and misinformation? And especially now, you have served in Kashmir. We've seen a lot of Western reportage on Kashmir, a lot of reports that come out continuously, which speak about Kashmir, many of them without any ground realities or data, targeting the Indian government and the Indian security forces. But the same is not done on POK or for Pakistan.
Western propaganda is their tool. It's a political tool. It's not that they have any love lost for the Kashmiris, either in our part of Jammu and Kashmir or in POJK. So, they will use this narrative when they want to manipulate the Indian government. And one thing is well known and clear, that this whole propaganda on human rights is a very important tool for beating the government with. Every action of the security forces and legitimate action of the security forces is painted out to be a human rights violation. Now, actually, what is human rights and when does a violation take place? A human rights violation takes place when the government defends the wrongdoings of its own security forces. But if I see the security forces deployed in Jammu and Kashmir or any other part where there is a conflict are not doing it for their personal gain. They are there to implement the government's policy. In the course of that, an excess takes place. If there is an excessive use of force, it's more a question of discipline and maybe bad training than human rights violation. Because at the bottom of his heart, his intention is not to kill the other person. He has no nothing to benefit from it. Yes, there have been instances where people from the security establishment have tried to fake situations for their own benefit to get profit. That is bad. That is where a human rights violation doesn't take place. It's a criminal act. But if the government should defend it, then a human rights violation takes place, which the government has not done. Wherever such violations have taken place, even recently you have seen there a captain who was accused of the 3 innocent killings in Rajouri has been court-martialed by the army and sentenced to life. So, a wrongdoing took place. An officer did a criminal act. He was punished for it. So, where is the rights violation? That way, if somebody gets murdered in Delhi, is that a human rights violation? This crime will take place. There will be people out of greed who will do a lot of things. So, I mean, that's where I think the understanding and the nuance of human rights violations have to be very clearly understood. And we should not start becoming defensive on every legitimate action we have taken to fight terrorism.
Mr. SM Sahai, thank you so much for joining us.